In 2021, some of America's biggest companies publicly told Congress that voting rights needed stronger protection. They said democracy works best when every American can vote. 5 years later, a new campaign finance analysis shows something very different happening with some of their political money. Companies that signed that voting rights letter, including Airbnb, DoorDash, Target, and Zillow, have contributed to state political organizations that are helping elect officials fighting battles that can weaken those same protections. So here is the question. When corporate America says it supports democracy, what happens when its money starts moving in the opposite direction? The most important part of this story is where the money is going. These are not just presidential campaigns or the giant congressional super PACs everybody watches. A lot of this money moves through organizations called 527 groups, which help finance races for governors, attorneys general, and state legislators. Those races get far less national attention, but the officials they elect can shape voting rules, abortion law, redistricting, and lawsuits that eventually reach the Supreme Court. In other words, the quieter races can produce some of the biggest consequences. If you haven't subscribed to Progressive Wave with Sam, please do so now and like this video. It helps us reach more people with independent political analysis like this. Here is one example. The Republican Attorneys General Association, known as RAGA, helps elect Republican state attorneys general. After January 6th, the organization came under scrutiny because robocalls connected to the organization encouraged people to attend the Stop the Steal rally in Washington. RAGA leaders later said they had no knowledge of those calls. Some corporations reduced or stopped contributions to major partisan state groups after January 6th, but that retreat did not last. According to data analyzed by the Nonpartisan Center for Political Accountability and reported by The Guardian, Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft either stopped or lowered contributions to Republican and Democratic state political groups for the 2022 midterms, but have resumed contributions during the current election cycle. Google is a striking example. Its contribution to RAGA was $50,000 in the 2022 cycle. So far in the 2026 cycle, the company has given $325,000. And this is where the contradiction becomes difficult to ignore. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Airbnb, DoorDash, Target, Zillow, and many other companies appeared on a 2021 business letter urging Congress to restore and strengthen protections in the Voting Rights Act. That letter said federal safeguards were needed because barriers to voting persisted, especially for communities of color. The companies were not vague. They publicly attached their names to the principle that access to the ballot needed stronger protection. Now look at what happened this year. In April, the Supreme Court decided Louisiana versus Calais, a major redistricting case involving Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The court ruled that the law did not require Louisiana to create an additional majority black district and struck down the map as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. RAGA celebrated the decision and praised Louisiana Attorney General Liz Murrell's role in winning it. That does not mean a check from Google, Target, or Airbnb was specifically earmarked to weaken the Voting Rights Act. There is no evidence of that, and it would be misleading to say so. Companies often give for access, business interests, relationships with office holders, or influence across a broad range of issues. Some give to organizations on both sides of the aisle, but that is exactly why this story matters. Political money does not need a memo line saying voting rights to help build the machinery that changes voting rights. The numbers show how large that machinery has become. Major Republican state-level 527 groups have raised about $240 million so far in the 2026 election cycle, compared with about $197 million for comparable Democratic groups. Corporate contributions account for a substantial share. The Center for Political Accountability says corporations have contributed $63 million to RAGA and the Republican Governors Association in this cycle, while corporate giving to their Democratic counterparts totaled about $54 million. And there is an even bigger trend behind it. Public Citizen reported in June that corporations had already spent $517 million on federal elections in the 2026 cycle, more than they spent during the entire 2024 presidential cycle. Their analysis says nearly 1/3 of all disclosed corporate political spending on federal elections since the Citizens United decision has happened in this election cycle alone. That means this is not simply a story about a few inconsistent corporate donations. It is a story about corporate political power expanding at the same moment that voting rules themselves remain the subject of fierce political conflict. Here is the part that matters most. When voters think about political power, they usually look upward to the White House, Congress, and the Supreme Court. Corporate money often looks downward first. Attorneys general, governors, state legislators, and organizations most Americans could not name. But those officials bring lawsuits, write election rules, draw districts, and build cases that move upward through the courts. A comparatively modest contribution at the state level can therefore help a company gain access to a political ecosystem capable of producing national consequences. The strongest defense corporations can make is also the simplest. Supporting a political organization does not mean endorsing every position taken by every official it helps elect. That is true. But it cannot be the end of the conversation. If a company publicly tells customers and employees that voting rights are part of its values, then shareholders and the public have every right to ask whether its political spending is helping empower officials whose legal strategy pushes in the opposite direction. And that may be the real story here. Corporate promises are easy when democracy is a branding exercise. The test comes when political access, regulatory influence, and business interests collide with those promises. In 2021, after a national crisis, many companies wanted Americans to know where they stood. In 2026, the money gives us another way to measure where they stand, and perhaps a more revealing one. What happens next is worth watching closely. The midterms are still ahead. Corporate political spending is already at extraordinary levels, and state races will determine who controls offices capable of shaping election law long after November. Watch not only what these companies say about democracy. Watch the organizations they finance, the officials those organizations elect, the lawsuits those officials bring, and the policies that follow. Because in American politics, the public statement tells you the brand. The money tells you the strategy. If you want independent political analysis that looks beyond the headline and follows the power, the money, and the consequences, subscribe to Progressive Wave with Sam. And if this video helped you understand what's really happening, like it, share it, and join me for the next story. Because here, we don't just ask what happened. We ask who has the power, who benefits, and what happens next.